In 1635–6, John Souch painted Sir Thomas Aston at the deathbed of his wife. Set in an imaginary bedchamber, the painting is divided into several compartments. These offer different levels of meaning. Madeline Aston died in childbirth on the 2nd of June 1635, leaving her husband Thomas and her young son Thomas, who would himself die but 2 years later. The draped cradle surmounted with a skull signifies another recently deceased child. Its somber darkness creates a central void in the painting. Its blackness contrasts dramatically with the whiteness of the figure of the laid-out mother who has herself died in childbirth. It is perhaps a little unnerving, if inexplicable, to find this same Madeline Aston represented a second time in the painting, appearing to be alive, elegantly seated in a posture of melancholy at the foot of her own deathbed. This curious doubling is a feature of the 16th century theory of two bodies. The natural body dies and decays. The social body should be preserved in an elevating representation as an element in collective memory. The painting can also be read in relation to the historical concepts of the family. The body of woman is positioned iconically as the instrument not merely of procreation, but of dynasty. Madeline Aston's body was the point of passage between Sir Thomas Aston and his offspring, a prospective Sir Thomas Aston. Different bodies, same names. They would by succession keep the social body of the Aston family in a continuous present. The painting commemorates Madeline Aston's failure to repeat and thus secure this patriarchal lineage. The draped cradle cum catafalque occupies the center of the painting. It serves as the dark hinge between life and death, between the erect, masculine, symbol-laden lineage of father and son and the languid, supine, melancholic, deadly, feminine domain of life and natural death, with its secondary existence in representation only in the emblematic form of female social virtue. In July 1992, I attended a conference held to celebrate the work of Walter Benjamin, which coincided more or less with the date of his birth in 1892. A few weeks later, I was discussing this event with a friend who had not come to the conference. He had found himself by chance, on the very day of that anniversary, in Port-Boo, the Spanish village in the Pyrenees where Walter Benjamin had committed suicide on the 26th or 27th of September 1940. I found myself wondering, belatedly and yet for the first time, about the details of what I had frequently taken as a symbolic caesura in the history of critical theory, rather than a concrete event performed by and on a real body. How did Walter Benjamin die? At what time of day? What happened to his body? Like the death of Van Gogh, one of my professional stock-in-trades, suicide easily becomes a mythic fact. If an artist or famous writer suicides, the death functions abstractly. It is the punctuation point for a critical discourse. It is the silencing of a theoretical project. It is the last brushstroke of an artistic practice. The natural, producing body ceases to operate. Art commemorates the social body. The work becomes even more mythological in collective memory because it is tinged by the particular nature of that passage from natural mortality to cultural immortality. My curiosity about the process of Benjamin's dying was fueled by a TV biopic about a woman named Jackie. In my generation, it's a point of honor to recall what you were doing the day Jack Kennedy was killed. His death is part of collective memory, kept alive by the endless uncertainty about the identity of his assassins. My sense of that death is composed of those blurred videos of the car and a photo of Jackie Kennedy in her blood-stained courage suit. TV melodrama made the physical process of prolonged dying much more vivid. Jackie lived. She lived through its eruption into her life, like the spurts of blood and brain which stained that dainty pink and blue suit. The biopic had to fill in what happened in the minutes, hours, days, and years that followed that ghastly 22 seconds in Dallas. To the person whom this event most radically affected. Confronted with her experience of death as the long-term living with its daily impact, I felt the need to imagine the process of Benjamin's action, its immediate effect on him, those around him, and perhaps on us. I turned to Gershom Scholem's story of his friendship with Walter Benjamin. Scholem writes that he only learned of his friend's death on the 26th or 27th of September 1940, on the 8th of November. He learnt it from Hannah Arendt, who had visited Port Boo, but she found no trace of a grave. Scholem reprints a letter from Frau Gurland to her husband, which provides the only firm information we have about Benjamin's self-administered overdose of morphine and the disposal of the body in a grave bought by Frau Gurland, but only for 5 years. No trace of this grave has ever been found. Hannah Arendt went to seek it. Scholem concludes his book with the further paragraph which reads, "Many years later, in the cemetery that Hannah Arendt had seen, a grave with Benjamin's name scrawled on the wooden enclosure was being shown to visitors. The photographs before me clearly indicate that this grave, which is completely isolated and utterly separate from the actual burial sites, is an invention of cemetery attendants, who, in consideration of the number of inquiries, wanted to assure themselves of a tip." I am shocked. Others have obviously felt the same need to get close to the reality of one of the major symbolic deaths of the 20th century. Our desire to do homage or even satisfy mawkish curiosity, might be assuaged by a name scrawled on a piece of wood. Walter Benjamin's almost unknown death and his apocryphal grave was part of a much huger, more terrifying and almost unimaginable collective experience of death. The murder of over 6 million people in what is known in Hebrew as HaShoah, the destruction. Perhaps this death surpasses the limits of representation. Inflicted on the natural body, can it be represented in cultural forms at all by way of a social body, except by fetishizing it as evil, as fascism, or as suffering and tormented memory? In May 1992, my father-in-law, Pavel Blumenzweig, also known as Paul Bryant, died at the age of 79. Not a name curated by collective memory, he was for me, nonetheless, a historic figure, for he was a figure of that history. He escaped the Nazis in Czechoslovakia and survived to die of disease in old age. He lived with the experience of that monumental 20th century death, having to carry with him the knowledge that his own parents did not die of disease, did not die of old age, did not die of an accident, but had been callously destroyed. Old and trusting people who could not believe what he told them about the threat against them because such a threat surpassed all imagination. They were horribly put to death, poisoned, humiliated, their bodies burnt,